Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Javier and my lovely wife, Christina, here. This is your first time you bumping into us. This is Cafecito for Two. We are the founders of Boundless Love.
Yes. Creating life-changing marriages.
And we also are the co-authors of Boundless Love, the same title, Healing Your Marriage Before It Begins. And here is our live stream. What would you call it?
Yeah, it's like a faith-based chat. So we are really honored to have amazing guests who share pieces of their stories and their testimony and their life's journey. And we're just so honored to have these thoughtful conversations about God's hand in our lives and how we heal and how we transform and how God leads us to be better people all the time.
Great. And we are having, I think we're having a good segue. We've been talking about childhood wounds, trauma. We've been discussing infidelity in previous episodes as well. And today we're going to touch on a subject that I think is really worth discussing, having a conversation.
It's really important to discuss. Absolutely.
And also relates to healing as well. So before I forget, if you're watching us through YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the reminder so you get notified when we're going live with a special guest that we have. So with further ado, today we are very honored and we're very grateful to have Sandie with us.
Kirkham, yes. So Sandie, we're going to bring her up in a sec. I just wanted to share a little bit about her biography. She is an author and a Christian author at that. And she will be talking a little bit about her book, but her book is entitled Let Me Pray Upon You, Breaking Free from a Minister's Sexual Abuse. And Sandie, we're so honored to have you on board. Woo, there she is.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to read a little bit about you, Sandie, but you can fill in the good stuff. I'm just going to do a really brief intro, and I'm sure it just skims the surface of your awesomeness. But Sandie Phillips Kirkham wrote the book, as I had mentioned, Let Me Pray Upon You, Breaking Free from a Minister's Sexual Abuse. And it's her personal account of how a charismatic youth minister preyed upon her, leaving her with a shattered faith and the ultimate shame of being forced from a church that she loved. And for 27 years, which is amazing, she hid her past from her husband and her close friends. And Sandie's going to take us on her journey of healing and seeking justice, which I just think is so profound. She and her husband now enjoy life with their grown children. And I love how you include two fairly well-behaved dogs. We just got a puppy this summer in the puppy pandemic. Her name's Maggie. She's a dachshund. And I relate to that, exactly what you mean. And you continue to voice your support and help other victims of clergy abuse. So thank you again for being here with us.
Yes, thank you for being here. Very honored. Would you like to open us in prayer?
Oh, is that okay, Sandie? Do you mind if we start with a prayer?
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Dear Lord Jesus, please bless this conversation and let the truth ride high and out to anyone who needs to hear it today and tonight. And just let Sandie's story be an inspiration of healing and empowerment and strength to those who need it. Let us say the right words at the right time to folks who are suffering, Lord, and let them feel protected and find their place in safety and resource, Lord. And we pray for everyone involved, and we surround Sandie with protection and gratitude and love. And we do this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Sandie, thank you for being with us here. We're very grateful. This is a subject that I think is very important, like Christina said, to really talk about and have a conversation. I just have a question for you. In your book, you detailed your experience about the abuse by your youth pastor. how the abuse affected.
My abuse started when I was 16. At the time, I was very active in the church. I loved going to church. It was a very big part of my life. My home life was a little chaotic. My parents were divorced. I didn't see my dad very much. So for me, church was kind of a safe place to land. Sure. If the doors of the church were open, I was there. That's no exaggeration. I taught Sunday school. I sang in the choir. I led church retreats. I was baptized when I was 13. And so when this new youth minister was hired, he came with a lot of great ideas. He was really different than any minister we'd ever had. He was 30, married with 2 children, but he dressed like we did. He knew our music. He went to our football games. He was just, I guess you would say in the 70s vernacular, hip.
Yeah.
And so he just had an aura about him, and adults and even the youth were all drawn to him. And so he made everybody feel special, but he singled me out early on to be one of the leaders. He spent a lot of time with me. And so once this grooming process that I talk about, he waited for a youth group meeting was held in my home. He waited for everyone to leave. Then he walked over to me and told me how wonderful I was and how appreciative he was that I was helping him in his ministry. And then he bent down and he kissed me. And I was just in shock because I stood there thinking, he just kissed me. But I immediately went to the thought that, well, this is my pastor. He wouldn't do anything he shouldn't be doing. And I felt guilty kind of for thinking that he was doing something he shouldn't do. And so in my 16-year-old mind, it was the only way I could rationalize it. And so I thought, well, it was just a kiss. It was just a kiss. It eventually, over a year, he spent that time grooming me, getting me more involved in the church, spending more time with me, taking me on hospital visits. And eventually he had sex with me one night at his home. And that's when I felt like I was at the point of no return. So that was kind of the beginning of the sexual abuse. And like I said, it went on for 5 years. His actions were discovered and he was forgiven. He was given a going away party. He was sent to the next church where he once again committed sexual misconduct. I was called in by the elders and told that because of my behavior, I was to leave the church. I can tell you I was devastated. I was absolutely I loved that church. I've said this many times. Being told that I wasn't fit to worship in that church probably had more of an impact on me than the actual abuse did. Yeah.
It's a spiritual trauma. It just cuts right to your soul. It's like, I mean, obviously I didn't live it, but I can definitely see how.
Well, yeah. And you know, I believe that the church was a place of a home of a loving God and that we trusted our spiritual leaders. And so when he took my life and my soul and he abused that, it stripped away those beliefs for me. And so for 27 years, I had this disconnect with God and certainly with the church. Now, I attended church because I wanted my children to have that experience, but I had many trigger factors during that time. And so for 27 years, I lived with this guilt and shame that I felt like I was as much to blame as he was. And that was a heavy burden to carry for 27 years. And keeping it from my husband was very difficult. Not difficult in the sense that I couldn't do it because we learned to be great actresses.
Right.
We learned to hide our past. But it was difficult for me knowing that I was keeping this from him.
What was the shift for you, Sandie? Like, was there a sudden event in your life that you decided I'm no longer going to harbor this secret anymore? Or was this something that you just, kind of turned a corner? I'm just curious, how were you able to release this?
Well, I described that in chapter 1 of my book.
Okay.
I was driving to my daughter's golf tournament and I passed the city to which he had moved after leaving our church. And I had an absolute, I wouldn't call it a breakdown, but an emotional trauma just overwhelmed me. I had to pull off to the side of the road and I sat on the side of the road and wept. And for the first time, it was a moment that I understood that God was telling me this wasn't your fault and you need to deal with it. I felt God's presence that I hadn't ever felt before in 27 years. Wow. And so I didn't know where that was going to lead. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that I had to let go of this. And so the first thing I did, I spent about 2 weeks in turmoil, just trying to figure out what God wanted me to do. I told my best friend. And that was the first time in 27 years that I had been able to say the words, I was sexually abused by my youth pastor. And then it took me another 3 or 4 months to tell my husband. But that began my journey. It was that moment that God said to me, this was a wolf in sheep's clothing. What was done to you was not your fault. Now, that didn't come easily, and it took time for me to understand the dynamics of clergy abuse. I had to learn what grooming meant, gaslighting, manipulation, all of those tools that they use on vulnerable people. And once I was able to understand that, I then came to the realization that for me, this isn't true for all victims, but for me, I needed to confront him. And I followed in the pattern of Matthew 18:15 through 17, to confront the one who's offended you. Wasn't easy. I was absolutely terrified, but I knew it was going to have to be part of my healing. And my biggest fear probably was that I would get into that room with him and be 16 all over again. And that the manipulation and all the things that I knew he would probably say would take me over again. And I would start to believe his lies. And fortunately, with God on my side, that didn't happen. I felt very calm when he entered the room. And I said things that I wanted to say to him. He never really acknowledged what he had done to me. And I was fortunate because he had been caught that he couldn't deny it. It wasn't like he was gonna, so I had that
behind you, on your side, right?
Yes, I did, which a lot of victims don't have, because they have the fear that their abuser is going to say she's lying, she's making it up. But I didn't have that. But he never could acknowledge the pain that he had caused. He talked about, how he had an alcoholic father, how he had been identified as a sexual addict, that he had all these issues in his life, and that's why he was the way he was. But I never got from him the sense that he understood what he did to my spiritual life.
Right. And did you feel that he had any remorse?
I don't, because when I first, I hired a private investigator. I let him do all the contacting. And his first response was, tell her I'm sorry, but I don't want to meet with her. I mean, his only response should have been, I will do whatever she wants of me. And that's, he kind of stonewalled a lot. He didn't want to meet at the church. He was still a pastor. He did not want to meet at his church. His elders were not aware of his past, which told me that he truly had not been a repentant man and had turned his life around. He had admitted that there had been many incidences throughout his career as a pastor. Not all teenagers or young girls, but a lot of them were older women in the church. He had committed sexual misconduct many times. He then was angry at me later on when he found out I was continually talking about my abuse and his abuse. So I felt his anger was obviously not appropriate, So I never felt like he truly understood what he had done to me.
So courageous of you, though, to have that meeting and conversation.
Absolutely.
It wasn't easy, but it was disappointing because I so hoped that there would be some recognition. But I'm glad that I did it. Yeah, I'm definitely glad that I was able to do that.
Good for you.
Absolutely. I'm curious how that affected your marriage when you told your husband, that you were abused and in your healing process, how that affected your marriage and your relationship with your husband.
Well, first, let me say how it affected it for the 27 years that I didn't tell him. I denied him the privilege and opportunity to help me through something that was very hurtful to me. As my spouse, I knew he would be supportive, but I was failing him and allowing him to be a part of that. And I almost felt like an imposter at sometimes because I felt like he fell in love with someone that he didn't know. Now, I say that, but that wasn't necessarily true, but I say that because that's what trauma does to you. I spent 27 years listening in the back of my mind to my abuser saying, don't ever tell, don't ever tell, don't ever tell. And so for me, telling was going to create a consequence that I wasn't ready to handle. I knew my husband would be supportive, but I didn't want to take that chance. I couldn't in my own mind feel like I could ever take that chance, which was totally wrong. So in my mind, I had denied him the opportunity to be the husband that I knew he could be. Once I told him, there was no wavering on his part. He never questioned me. He never judged me. He was totally supportive of me. And I shouldn't have been surprised by that. But again, the trauma that was created in my life, it interrupts your cognitive thinking.
It's you can't even think. Yeah, it's your cognitive process.
Your reality is distorted.
Yes.
It's distorted by the abuse. And so our marriage from that point on then became actually stronger because now he was a part of my life, of a certain part of my life that he hadn't been before. And he supported me writing the book. The book has some very personal details in it, which I'm not sure every husband would be willing to allow those things to be written in public. But there was never, ever any question. He always told me, whatever helps you heal, that's what I want you to do. I don't want you to do anything for me, for your friends, or what you expect that they think you should do. You do what you think you need to do. And I couldn't ask for any more than that. I mean,
I'm sure that support really expedited your healing in the moment too, right? Like when you have that unconditional love and support from your spouse, you're just launched, right? Then it's like green light, let's do this.
Yeah, and as long as he's behind me and God's behind me,
there you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow. The other thing he did, which I think was so helpful, was he always told me, I will listen to whatever you want to tell me, but don't feel like you need to tell me any more than you want to. If you want to talk about it, we will. And if you don't, we don't need to. And that was a relief for me because, again, there were so many things that were personal and things that had happened during the abuse that I wasn't ready to talk about. And that was, in 2004, 2005. So I didn't write the book until 2 years ago. It took me that long to finally say I was ready to do that.
Yeah, it's so courageous. I mean, you're giving people so much of a gift just by, your voice and shedding light on this. It's just so huge. And I'm sure you know that at some level, but it's such a gift, really turning. I know it's obviously traumatic and a tragedy, but it is such a huge blessing for all of us. Because
and I've often thought, what if I had heard someone's story when this was happening to me?
Absolutely.
Right.
What would it have done for me if I'd known I wasn't alone? Because I really thought I was the only one this was happening to. I mean, I got the one bad apple in the barrel. So I was thankful to be able to say, look, I'm not the only one. And so, yes, I wrote my story and tell my story to help other victims because so many times they do feel alone. And I also wrote it because I wanted to help educate people to understand the dynamics of clergy abuse and that this is an important topic and that we need to stop returning these men to ministry. We need to see this as not just a moral fault, but it's a professional violation as well. And they've taken an oath to help someone. And so when they take that oath and abuse someone, they're no longer the shepherd. They're no longer a shepherd and they're not fit to be in the ministry. Now, I know some people say, well, we need to forgive. Forgiveness and removal from the ministry are not opposite of each other.
Absolutely.
And so I say, look, all of these men, if they show repentance, then they too can be forgiven, the same forgiveness that God gives to all of us, but they deserve that forgiveness sitting in the third row of the church, not standing in the pulpit. And any time it involves a child, a minor, that's against the law.
Right.
That should be reported to the police. And so often, believe it or not, it's not. Churches tend to want to keep it a secret. They want to hide it. They want to try to help the pastor. That's wrong. That's wrong. You cannot take a child and abuse them and then take the abuser and say, well, he needs help. He might need help, but he doesn't need help while he's in the ministry. Right. He needs to be removed.
Well, it's a clear level of boundaries, right? And you're not enabling or you're not allowing, right? Because if you turn the other way, right, the other cheek, etc., you're enabling that behavior as an organization. And so I think you're right. It's like there's so many layers to this. There's sexual abuse, in general for women. And then you have this added layer, right, of clergy abuse, which is within an institution. And there's so much taboo and stigma and denial, like you said. So,
and also when you give support to the offending pastor and you rally around him, the victim is often left on the sidelines. Right. You're saying to that victim, well, what was done is bad, but we really need to help this man who has problems or issues in his life. And he very well may be, and helping him is the Christian thing to do, but he needs to be removed from the ministry. God warns us 27 times in the Bible about wolves in sheep's clothing, 27 times. So we shouldn't be surprised when we find these men among us.
Yeah. Right, right.
And so when God warns us, we need to heed the warning. He's telling us these are not shepherds, they're wolves in sheep's clothing, and they're not safe to be in the church. And removing them is not about punishment necessarily. Right. It's about the integrity of the church, and it's about safety. I wasn't his first victim. My church was aware of another incident in his first church prior to coming to our church. Wow. So I wasn't even his first victim. And even after he committed sexual misconduct and abuse with me, they still were willing to forgive him. But that also speaks to these men and how charismatic they are.
Right, right.
Because they don't just groom the victim, they groom the entire congregation. So they too have been sucked in by this person. And their failure to see his behavior is not only based on the fact that he was able to fool them as well, but keep in mind, these are men that have married us, they baptized our children, they've sat at our bedside while we've had a dying parent. So it's hard for us to separate this person we think we know from the person who this person really is. And in my book, I show the difference between what was happening throughout the church with this man and all the good things he was doing, but what he was doing to me while he was having sex with me. He'd have sex with me on a Saturday night and preach on the sanctity of marriage on Sunday.
Wow.
So this wasn't just a man who made a mistake or who was attracted to someone and couldn't help himself. This was methodical. It was done with actual calculation. And as I also say, most victims are targeted. These men look for vulnerable people to target. So it's no accident. They are very calculating and methodical in their behavior in order to control this person, whether it's either sexually or emotionally.
And I am sure with your book, and you talk about how churches, some churches, turn the other way. They don't really, they just don't want to recognize it. I did youth ministry for 4 years. And I was a little bit surprised that the only thing, obviously, you get fingerprinted and you get a background check and everything else. But I set out my own boundaries. I set out my own
boundaries.
Very
strict.
If there was 2 ladies in the room, I will step aside until everybody will come in. If people needed a ride, I won't give them a ride. I will call the parents first and wait for them in the parking lot. So I kind of set up my own rules because I'm thinking, I want to make sure that, everything there's boundaries here. But I was very surprised that the church did not say, this is the guidelines that you got to follow, or we're going to serve you, or there's going to be always a female person. You're not allowed. There was not,
wasn't that clear?
Right?
Right.
And I am so thankful about your book because that can give a different perspective to some churches to, sure, we need to have the fingerprint and the background check, but at the same time, we need to set up those rules so we can identify right behavior from youth ministers and ministers as well, right? Because, we need to be aware of those things.
Well, and there's so many layers to this. We're parents. We have 2 girls, 13 and 10. And we have lengthy conversations with them about this, not just obviously in their church activities, but in their school, right?
Anywhere, right?
Yeah, and how you carry yourself and how you don't go into a room. I don't care even if it's a bathroom. I don't care where it is. Really setting up these sort of understandings that you are not supposed to be with an adult ever alone. Period. And why that is, but I think it's it's so important, like you said, for all of us to wake up. And it is a bigger issue. It's like, you have had this experience, and of course there's so many victims of clergy abuse, but it's all of our issue. It's all our responsibility.
Yes.
That's my feeling. I mean, I feel like, this is all we need. We all, like you. I love how you talk about that, Sandie, that, the veil is on all of us, right? In your church, in your community. It wasn't just you. This is a phenomena, and we all have to be discerning, right? And go forward and call it out.
Exactly. And I so appreciate the fact that you talk about the boundaries, because there do need to be these boundaries. And if we don't set those boundaries, then we are setting ourselves up and putting our children and vulnerable women at risk in the church. And the church should be the safest place on earth.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so, what happens though is, because it's the pastor, we tend to not want to think that this could be happening. And we then kind of let our guard down. So many people said to me later, 27 years after I had come out and told my story, people who were in the church at the time said to me, I remember a time when I thought, I don't know why he's taken her into the office. Or I remember he said something to you, and I thought that was odd that he would say that to you. So there were red flags. So I tell people also, not that we want to be lurking around looking for things that people be doing anything wrong. That's not what we want to do. But if you see something that just doesn't seem right, you might want to trust your gut and just pay a little closer attention. And I'm sure you would feel like if there was something that someone thought was a little suspicious, you would immediately want to correct that or say, this will, I'm sorry that was the impression that was given. That's not at all what I was trying to say or do. When he was confronted, there was a youth group leader in the church at the time that the abuse was going on who suspected something. And she went to him and she asked him point blank, is there something going on between you and Sandie? And instead of saying, oh, no, why would anyone think that? And I'm horrified that you would think, he got angry. He accused her of lying. He accused her and said to her, well, if you can't trust me, you should leave the church. I mean, that's not the response of a person who's concerned and cares about people. That's the response of a person who's about to get caught doing something.
Yeah, that's essentially guilt, right? Turned on inward, meaning anger. Yeah, because if anyone ever had any doubt around my behavior, I would be mortified. Like, I would do everything in my power to make sure that I communicated that wasn't even a possibility, right? It's like so disturbing. But I think what you're saying too, also about this glorification or idealization of the pastor role and putting them up on a pedestal, right? And almost being like, they're infallible, or we get charmed by them. But that also is this really slippery slope that, again, betrays all of us. Because if you don't hold anyone accountable, that power is definitely going to go to someo's head. It creates a higher risk. I'll put it that way.
I remember I was in a men's ministry, and I was working the kitchen, and a pastor came late, and he says, hey, there's any leftovers, there's any wine, there's anything you can serve. And I remember serving him, and while he was eating and drinking, I was looking at him, and he looked at me and said, listen, I am as human as you are. There's nothing different between you.
He's like,
I just educated myself. I practice this. I'm clergy, but I am a man like you. I ain't going to get a little bit buzzed by drinking this wine, and I'm going to eat this the same way you eat it. And that's when it hit me. And I'm thinking, there are human like us. There's no difference.
That's true. But keep in mind, people see you,
that's
what you are, and the reality of how people see you, because you are a representative of God. And so people who will view you differently, and that doesn't mean you aren't, you're just like everyone else, but in the minds of many in the congregation, and certainly someone who's in a vulnerable position, who's in need of help, who's got low self-esteem, when that pastor then comes to them trying to help them, they kind of see them as their savior in a way, that this person who's going to help me. And so that's why That's why the responsibility of maintaining those boundaries is so important, because this person has come to this pastor or rabbi or priest and says, I need help. And for that person then to take advantage of that person when they're in that vulnerable position is evil.
Yeah, it is
evil. Just evil.
It is.
It's evil. They are taking advantage of a position of vulnerability. And if a doctor or a therapist were to do that, they lose their license.
Yeah,
they lose their
and
license.
I totally agree with you that those consequences, you know, it's like a sickness, right? And we have to own it. We have to acknowledge it. And there has to be this institutional support. And I do think that I'm just so thankful that you're on, because I hope people feel inspired that they don't get into this, well, that's not my reality, or that's not my problem, or that doesn't happen in my church, or you know what I'm saying? If it happens once, it affects everyone, right? This is, and like you said, it's more widespread than we know of, right?
This
is not something that, you know, I'm sure you're aware that when, you know, sexual assault started carrying, for example, higher penalties in court, and men started, you know, actually serving time for rape cases, the influx, the reported cases increased, right? It didn't decrease. So sometimes, you know, we have to be aware when these issues come to light around clergy abuse, it may look like it's getting worse before it gets better, right?
Right. And keep in mind, victims of clergy abuse, or any abuse, but particularly clergy abuse, I think, because you know that you're going against the institution, or that you're, and many of us, if we were in the church, obviously we're spiritual people to begin with. We had a Christian life, so we don't want to hurt the church. That's part of it too. You know, our coming forward is going to, you know, maybe potentially hurt the church, and we don't want to do that. And so there's all kinds of reasons why, you know, for me, once the abuse was over, I just wanted it to be over. So I didn't want to talk about it again. I wasn't going to ever talk about it, because talking about it meant that I was going to have to relive it. I also knew that I could be judged. I had been thrown out of a church. So why wouldn't the rest of the world judge me? And then I never let go of those words, don't ever tell. No one's going to believe you. That just stays with you forever until you're able to let go of it. And so I tell victims, the first thing you need to do is recognize what was done to you. This just didn't happen to you. This was done to you, and it's not your fault. Whatever you think you could have done or didn't do, you did what you could at the time with the coping skills that you had. And this man took you at a time when you were in a crisis, whether it was because you were a young child, whether, as in my case, you were a teenager who was looking for a father figure, whether you're an adult woman who's going through a divorce and is looking for counseling. They targeted you. So this was not your fault. So I don't want victims to feel like they have to live with this guilt and shame. And the next thing I suggest is educate yourself. Learn what grooming is. Learn what manipulation is, gaslighting, all of the, and I talk about that in my book, you know, understanding victims and understanding why we have responded the way we have and why we stay quiet for so long. You know, one of the questions I'm always asked, well, if it really happened, why didn't you say it in the beginning? Well, you know, we're traumatized, for one. And secondly, we're threatened by our abusers. You know, if you tell, you're going to be blamed. Or I was old enough to understand that if I were going to talk about what this man was doing to me, it was going to be a huge bombshell in the church. I didn't want that responsibility. And we don't have the words to say. Who even in their mind imagines that you're going to be sexually abused by your pastor?
Oh, it's a nightmare.
So it is. And so, you know, in writing the book, I hope that I'm able to help victims navigate their own healing path. I mean, each path is going to be different based on their own experiences and their support system. So my healing path may not be someone else's, but there might be something that I've done or said that can help them navigate their way to healing. And let me say, my healing was so wonderful for me because it brought me back to God. I still have difficulty with church because I have trigger factors, but I understand them now. I understand them. So I'm not afraid of them, and they're not as intense as they used to be. You know, when you asked me in the beginning, it would be okay to pray. Many victims have difficulty with prayer. And I appreciate that, because there was a time that I just couldn't pray, and I couldn't listen to anyone else pray. But with time, that got better. I mean, I didn't pray for 27 years. I carried my Bible with me to school every day when I was a teenager. Every day I carried my Bible. It sat on my shelf in my home for 27 years unopened. And so to understand that trauma
and heartbreak
is important. Right. And it's important. So when you asked that question, it said to me, you had an understanding of that trauma. So I tell people, if you want to help a victim, take them where they are.
Absolutely.
So things like prayer, Bible study, singing of hymns, all those things are comforting to most Christians, but they may not be to a victim of clergy abuse.
Absolutely.
And just allow that understanding.
That's worth that's very educational. I really appreciate that, Sandie. That I will take that with
so,
you.
Ask a victim. And if they say, no, I don't want you to pray, be okay with that. Don't try to convince them why prayer is important. If you allow them that moment to heal and you allow them that understanding, you will send them so much farther down the healing path, which is a gift that you are giving them to grant that understanding.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's so beautiful. I just want to say one thing really quick is one of the most powerful things, I'm a social worker by trade. And one of the most powerful things that I always feel in my career is so many of my mentors have said, you don't have to fix anyone's problems. Okay. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is create a positive association and experience of them receiving help of any kind, even if you just listen silently, right?
You create a safe space for them.
Yes.
You create a safe space where they can trust you. Right.
No judgment, no agenda. Right. And then, like you said, whatever it is, then wherever they are, they will carry themselves, where they need to go next. But I think that's so profound because, so many of us, it's so shocking and you want to fix it or you want to help that person. And we all have these prescribed, things we want to do. But like you said, if you don't know, you haven't lived that experience. So
there is so absolutely power in prayer. But again, so many victims that this didn't happen with my abuser, but the number of victims I've talked to that would say, oh, he would pray before we would have sex. So you can't allow that to define how you will help that person.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. It came to mind. I'm also a survivor of physical abuse by the clergy. I was in an orphanage for 4 years, and I remember the nuns hitting us with the rosary. And when I grew up, it's funny. I never was compelled to pray or touch a rosary because that was something they used to hurt you. And I have seen, getting beat up by the priests. But one of the things that when I came to the United States that really resonated with me is somebody told me, we are the church.
That's right.
The clergy in the building are a building and clergy, but we are the church, right? The parish, the congregation is the church, right? And when you see that, that's how you can, take
your ownership and
accept God's love and looking at those people as they're human beings in a building, right? So.
And you probably know.
Sorry.
As you probably know from your experience, healing takes time. It takes time to, understand what was done to us. And so I also tell victims, look, you're going to take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back sometimes, but you want to look where you are and where you're going, not where you've been, but where you're going. And every step you take forward, that's a victory. Yeah. That's a victory. And celebrate that victory. But it's not easy. Healing is messy. I had probably a good 2 years where I was just really in turmoil. Even though I had this supportive husband and I was coming to grips with my abuse, it took me a while to finally have a place where I could find myself feeling like, now it's always a part of me, it doesn't go away, but I don't let it define my life. It doesn't define who I am.
Good for you. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Right. And I hope other victims know that too.
Yes. Do you have, as we wrap up here, Sandie, do you have any resources or things that you wanted to just offer up for people? I know you have a fabulous website yourself and you have some resources
I do.
there.
And I'll hold up my book.
Yes, please do.
There we go.
That's my book. There are resources in the back of this book. I have about 10 or 12 resources. The Hope of Survivors is a website that has a lot of good information. I'm trying to think of the top of my head. There's Facebook has a lot of, if you just go into clergy abuse, a lot of supportive groups. And this isn't about pastor bashing. This isn't about, angry people. This is about we can heal and how we can help churches respond appropriately to when abuse occurs in the church. So the website, if you go to my website or in the book, my book's available on Amazon or at my website. I'm going to send you a copy because I think it would be helpful to have a copy of my book as a resource.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Well, I would love to do that, and I will do that. So yeah, there's a lot out there which is helpful and different than when I was going through this. There wasn't the internet. So there are a lot of resources that victims can access, and I think they should do that.
Yeah. And you can do that with more distance, maybe that gives you feel more psychologically safe, right? That you can reach out to people. It's maybe lessens the risk sometimes. And, so there's more opportunities perhaps, right?
Absolutely.
So, right.
Because like you're doing, I think the goal is obviously not to drift from God's love, because that's key, but healing yourself and come back to
that's
God's
imperative.
Love. That's something beautiful that you're doing and giving support.
Yeah, you're like a heroine. You're a superwoman. So impressed. Like, what
I don't
a role
know about
model.
that, but yeah.
Yes.
Well, I do hope I know it's been helpful. I've gotten so many letters, emails telling me, the book has been so helpful to them. One quick thing that was a surprise for me in the book was that the number of women who wrote to me and said, I wasn't abused by clergy, but I was in an abusive relationship. And so all of the things that you talked about, that grooming and the manipulation and the gaslighting was a part of my relationship with my ex-husband or my ex-boyfriend. And it helped them to see in their own relationship with them, what really it was an abusive relationship that they hadn't recognized before, which, I wrote it from a perspective of clergy abuse, but the book can be helpful to anyone who's in an abusive situation, I think.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. The behavior is very, very similar. The tactics, all of it. Thank you so much, Sandie. You're such a blessing, and we're really, really thankful for you. And I can't wait to dig into the book.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. It's been a delight talking with both of you, and I appreciate your messages and your voice as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're very grateful. So thank you for everyone who's watching. We're going to put the descriptions on the video below so you can go and purchase Sandie's book as well, and also get all the resources. And also
on her website,
if you have any questions, please put in there as well. So Christine and I or Sandie can answer you as well.
Yes, fabulous. Please reach out. We're happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much
for watching,
and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.